You enter the cabin where young Abraham Lincoln first draws breath in 1809, a boy destined to stretch far beyond these log walls. His father, Thomas Lincoln, is a carpenter and farmer with hands calloused from hard labor, and his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, tends the hearth with quiet grace. You notice the rough-hewn walls, the faint smoke lingering from last night's fire, and the occasional squeak of the floorboards as if the house itself were whispering stories. Lincoln's early life is marked by scarcity. Food is simple, clothing hand-me-downs, and schooling intermittent at best. Yet even here, there is a spark, a curiosity in the boy who watches the world with wide eyes and asks more questions than the quiet cabin seems to allow. You see him wandering barefoot along the creek, skipping stones and imagining distant lands, while his older sister giggles at his awkward attempts to balance on logs. He listens intently when his father tells of frontier hardships, yet also invents stories to entertain himself, shaping a mind that will one day wrestle with the weightiest decisions of a nation. Little known to most, young Abraham once saved a neighbor's pig from a river, a story that circulated in nearby towns and hinted at both his compassion and sense of daring. Historians still argue whether these small adventures nurtured his later courage more than formal schooling ever could. At night, the cabin grows colder than you expected, and the flicker of a single candle casts long shadows across the walls. You imagine the boy lying awake, listening to the wind in the trees, wondering about the world beyond Kentucky, a world that seems enormous and unknowable. The rhythms of frontier life shape him, demanding resilience, patience, and a quiet humor. You sense the beginnings of empathy in his gaze, the awareness that life is uneven, unfair, and yet full of small marvels if you pay attention. Even in this harsh setting, there are moments of warmth. Nancy teaches him to read, passing down scraps of books and letters, and you can almost hear her soft encouragement as he struggles through each sentence. His laughter bubbles unexpectedly, light and contagious, breaking through the harshness of frontier chores. These early experiences, blending hardship and learning, lay the foundation for a mind that will one day stretch across debates, battlefields, and political arenas. As you step back outside, the cool evening breeze brushes against your face, carrying the smell of wildflowers mixed with smoke. The land stretches before you, rolling and untamed, reminding you how small this cabin is in the sweep of history, yet how immense the possibilities that arise from such beginnings. The story of Lincoln's early years is one of quiet growth, stubborn curiosity, and the shaping of character amid simplicity and struggle, planting seeds that will later bear the weight of a nation's destiny. You follow young Abraham as he navigates the uneven rhythms of frontier life, stepping lightly over roots and mud patches while carrying a book almost too heavy for his small hands. The Kentucky woods around you are alive with rustling leaves, bird calls, and the distant bleating of goats, a soundtrack to his early education, which relies mostly on borrowed volumes and sheer determination. Formal schools are few, fleeting, and poorly supplied, so you watch him create his own lessons, tracing letters in the dirt and memorizing passages by the light of a flickering fire. You can almost feel the rough texture of the pages he treasures, worn from constant reading and rereading, each word imprinting itself in his mind. Lincoln is largely self-taught, absorbing everything from Aesop's fables to the Bible, and even the occasional newspaper he can borrow from neighbors or travelers. He learns arithmetic on scraps of wood, scratching numbers into the surface with a stub of charcoal. Here, in this rough and ready environment, you sense the forming of a sharp, patient intellect. Quirky tidbits emerge. He reportedly enjoyed telling long, rambling stories that made his listeners laugh, even when the tales went nowhere, a playful habit that reveals early seeds of his wit. Historians still argue whether his humor was a shield against loneliness or a bridge to connection, but either way it becomes one of his defining traits. Occasionally you see him performing chores with his father, chopping wood and hauling water, labor that seems relentless yet builds a steady endurance. He learns the value of diligence and attention to detail, skills that will later serve him in law and politics. You notice how the boy's eyes linger on the horizon during these tasks. As though already imagining a life beyond the hills and creeks of Kentucky, he practices reading aloud, his voice tentative at first, then gradually more confident, as if each phrase carries a sense of his emerging identity. Traveling across the countryside with Thomas, you glimpse Lincoln's first forays into observation of people and character. He notices gestures, listens to local stories, and quietly records them in his mind. One quirky tale tells of him watching a neighbor chase runaway pigs and turning the chaos into a witty anecdote for friends, a sign of his natural storytelling instinct. Historians still argue whether this skill and observation contributed more to his legal reasoning or his empathetic connection with others, but it clearly marks an early pattern of attention to detail paired with narrative flair. Evenings are calm but cold. The cabin is lit only by dim candlelight or the occasional fire, and Lincoln reads aloud to his family, sometimes stumbling over difficult words but persisting with determination. You can almost hear his soft, patient pronunciation and feel the weight of self-instruction pressing gently against the warmth of domestic life. Books are his companions, offering glimpses of faraway lands and human struggles, while he develops a deep love of words, metaphor, and argument. These moments of solitary study and quiet reflection are interspersed with playful mischief, throwing pebbles at trees or teasing younger siblings, which makes the household feel alive and human, not just historical. As you step back from the cabin, the sky is tinged with the soft pink of dusk. You sense that Lincoln's mind is stretching, eager to grasp the world beyond the boundaries of his immediate surroundings. He is learning not only facts and stories, but also resilience, patience, and the art of careful observation, skills that will serve him in years to come. Here, in these self-taught hours and modest labors, you see the shaping of a young man who will combine intellect, curiosity, and humor to navigate far more complex terrains than the Kentucky woods ever imagined. You walk alongside Abraham as he begins to notice matters of the heart, feeling the awkward flutter of first affection in the midst of his otherwise busy frontier existence. The landscape around him is familiar now, the creek, the woods, the fields stretching golden under the sun. But suddenly, his attention shifts toward another kind of exploration, one that involves the subtle language of glances, shy smiles, and carefully chosen words. He has met Anne Rutledge, a young woman whose quiet presence and gentle humor seem to captivate him more than anyone else he has known. You can almost see him fidgeting with his hat, trying to imagine a way to impress her without revealing too much of his tender shyness. The romance is simple yet profound. Letters are exchanged, messages pass through friends, and Lincoln often walks longer routes home just to steal a glimpse of her. There's a small, little-known anecdote that he once carved her initials into a tree along a path they both frequented, a playful yet lasting testament to his feelings. You can feel the nervous energy, the hope, and the fear of rejection swirling around him as he learns the delicate art of human connection. Historians still argue whether Anne's influence extended beyond affection into shaping his emotional maturity, but it is clear that she leaves a lasting impression. Tragedy, however, is never far away. The frontier life that nurtures so much strength is also harsh, and illness sweeps through communities with alarming frequency. Anne Rutledge falls sick, and despite Lincoln's quiet attempts to help, she dies, leaving him with a sorrow that seems almost too heavy for one young man. You sense the quiet grief settling into his bones, a sorrow that is both deeply personal and strangely universal, teaching him early lessons about mortality, compassion, and resilience. Even amidst heartbreak, there are tender memories, the gentle laughter they shared while walking through the tall grass, or the way she teased him for his awkwardness, leaving traces of warmth even after she is gone. Amid this personal loss, Lincoln continues his learning, turning again to books and study as a way to cope. You can picture him reading aloud to himself in the dim candlelight, voice soft, sometimes breaking as he confronts the emptiness left by Anne's absence. His humor, which was playful and light before, now carries subtle undertones of reflection and empathy. Quirky moments still occur, such as him practicing lines for speeches he is not yet giving, or attempting small tricks to amuse neighborhood children, revealing that even grief cannot erase his innate desire to connect. The lessons of love and loss shape him in ways that are invisible at first glance. You notice a new seriousness in his eyes, a deeper understanding of human emotions, tempered by patience and reflection. Walking through the fields alone, he seems taller somehow, carrying both memory and sorrow with quiet dignity. These experiences, intimate and intense, prepare him to confront greater challenges in life with a steady heart, blending empathy with resilience. Historians still debate how deeply this early heartbreak influenced his later decisions. Yet there is no question that it leaves an imprint on the young man quietly observing, learning, and growing into himself. As you leave the path where he once strolled with Anne, the evening sky stretches softly above, a pale wash of pink and orange. You can almost hear the whisper of wind through the grass, a gentle companion to the memories of fleeting joy and enduring sorrow. Here, amid youthful love and inevitable loss, Lincoln is learning the fragile yet profound dimensions of the human heart, a lesson that will quietly inform every choice he makes in the years ahead. You find yourself on a dusty frontier road, following Abraham as he steps into adulthood, balancing odd jobs and the new challenges of learning law without a formal mentor. The air is warm, dust rising with each step, and the scent of horses and sawdust clings to the small towns he passes through. You watch him enter makeshift courtrooms in wooden buildings, listening attentively as legal arguments fly over rough-hewn benches. These early experiences in prairie law are unglamorous, yet they shape his meticulous attention to detail and his patience with human foibles. Lincoln's days are long, filled with travel across counties, reading law books by candlelight, and negotiating contracts for local farmers. There is a quirky story about him once walking several miles in the rain to deliver a legal document on time, arriving soaked but smiling, earning him both admiration and gentle teasing from clients. Historians still argue whether his informal method of studying law, copying, memorizing, and debating with peers was more effective than formal education could have been, but it clearly produces a sharp and versatile legal mind. You watch him practice speeches aloud, pacing in empty streets, shaping arguments with care and occasionally chuckling at his own phrasing. The frontier courts teach him more than law. They teach him human nature. He notices subtle reactions from juries, the unspoken tensions between litigants, and the way stories can sway opinion even more than facts. His empathy grows alongside his reasoning, a combination that later makes him both a formidable lawyer and a persuasive politician. Between court cases, Lincoln interacts with townsfolk, helping neighbors with small tasks and listening to the stories of ordinary lives. You can almost hear him laughing with children while balancing ledger books, or quietly offering advice to those in need, always mindful of fairness. One little-known fact is that he kept a notebook filled with notes on local disputes, recording both facts and observations, a precursor to the careful documentation that would later serve him in public office. Traveling at night, he often sleeps under the stars, listening to the sounds of the prairie, the rustle of grasses, distant hoots of owls, the wind through sparse trees. These moments of solitude allow him to reflect on what he has learned about law, justice, and human nature. You feel the patience in his movement, the quiet focus that comes from knowing that every small action contributes to a larger understanding of life and people. The prairie lawyer days are not just about building a career. They are about shaping a moral compass. You notice how he weighs decisions carefully, considers the needs of others, and cultivates a sense of humor to ease tension. These experiences, though mundane at the time, quietly forge the skills and temperament that will later define his approach to leadership, law, and conflict resolution. Each courtroom, each dusty road, each small-town visit is a step toward the man who will one day confront the immense challenges of a nation on the brink of division. You now walk beside Abraham as he moves from the local prairie courts into the wider arena of state politics, feeling the shift from personal disputes to matters that touch the lives of entire communities. The Illinois air is thick with the scent of freshly cut timber and the faint temps of coal smoke, and towns are bustling with merchants, farmers, and political enthusiasts. You see him standing in small halls, wooden floors creaking beneath attentive audiences, delivering speeches that are both earnest and persuasive. Each argument is carefully shaped, blending moral conviction with a touch of humor to engage listeners who may be skeptical or distracted. Lincoln's political awakening is gradual but deliberate. You noticed him reading newspapers and legislative documents, debating vigorously with peers, and quietly observing the strategies of older politicians. Little-known tidbits emerge, like the time he walked miles to attend a political meeting, arriving late yet capturing the room's attention with a single story about fairness and justice. Historians still argue about whether his early political choices were motivated more by principle or ambition, but it is clear that he is developing a talent for careful persuasion and empathy for diverse perspectives. Campaigning involves long journeys on horseback or in wagons, often over rough terrain and in unpredictable weather. You can almost feel the soreness in his legs, the wind tugging at his coat, and the energy it takes to meet constituents from different backgrounds. Yet he listens patiently, asking questions about local needs and concerns, noting details that others overlook. These journeys are not only physically taxing but also formative, teaching him the importance of observation, patience, and the careful weighing of words. In the state legislature, Lincoln experiments with rhetoric and policy, engaging in debates over infrastructure, banking, and quietly, the expanding tensions over slavery. You notice his careful notes, the small drawings of ideas in the margins, and the occasional humorous anecdote to lighten tense moments. A quirky story tells of him performing a mock debate with himself in a hotel room to practice responses, something that makes him smile and perhaps confounds any onlookers. These exercises, though private, sharpen his skills and reveal a mind always turning over problems from multiple angles. Evenings are reflective. You see him writing letters to friends, sometimes rereading speeches under candlelight, pondering both policy and principle. He observes the human condition with the patience of someone who has spent years learning from every story, every hardship, and every laughter-filled moment on the frontier. The blending of intellect, empathy, and humor that you have watched develop is now coalescing into a political style that will carry him further than he can yet imagine. By the end of these years, Lincoln is recognized as thoughtful, earnest, and unusually attentive to the voices of ordinary citizens. You can sense the weight of responsibility beginning to settle on him, the sense that leadership is not simply about authority but about understanding, connecting, and persuading. Historians still argue whether these early political steps directly predicted his later presidential strategies, but watching him now, you can almost see the first glimmers of the man who will navigate a nation through its most divisive era, balancing principle with practical judgment at every turn. You step into the warm, bustling Lincoln household, feeling the comforting smell of home-cooked meals and polished wood as Abraham begins his married life with Mary Todd. The room is alive with conversation, the laughter of children, and the quiet hum of domestic routine. You notice the small details, the way Mary carefully folds letters, the occasional tap of her needlework, and Abraham's habit of reading aloud at the dinner table, often stopping to explain a passage or add a humorous aside. It is a household full of learning, affection, and subtle tensions, a microcosm of the larger world he navigates outside these walls. Marriage brings joy and challenge. You see them walking together through the garden, debating politics, literature, and occasionally the placement of furniture, reflecting both affection and the clash of two strong personalities. A little-known anecdote reveals Lincoln's playful side. He once pretended to misplace Mary's favorite pen, only to theatrically discover it in an absurd location, making her laugh despite the stress of daily life. Historians still argue about the influence of Mary Todd's social ambitions on Lincoln's political decisions, but their dynamic clearly shapes both his private and public persona. Parenthood introduces a new rhythm. You hear the pitter-patter of little feet, the soft coos of infants, and the occasional sobs that echo down the hallway. Lincoln balances his legal and political work with nightly readings to his children, sometimes inventing stories to entertain them, other times practicing speeches or jotting down notes on political matters in the quiet of the evening. His empathy, honed through years of observing human behavior, now extends to his own household, as he navigates the highs and lows of family life with patience and attentiveness. You notice the small everyday quirks that make the household human. Lincoln carving a simple toy for a child from a scrap of wood, Mary leaving tiny handwritten notes and books, and the children scrambling over furniture with boundless energy. Each act, however trivial it may seem, contributes to the shaping of character, nurturing Lincoln's sense of responsibility and his understanding of the domestic sphere. These moments are quieter than the political arenas he frequents, yet they influenced him profoundly, offering lessons in patience, compromise, and joy. Evening conversations extend long into the night. You can feel the soft warmth of lamplight on the walls, smell the fading dinner, and hear the quiet rustle of paper as Abraham reviews letters or drafts speeches. He reflects on the world beyond his home, yet remains tethered to the intimate realities of family, understanding that leadership is not solely a matter of public acclaim but also of private grounding. Quirky and tender moments continue. Lincoln once attempted to teach his children card tricks, fumbling hilariously, laughter echoing through the room, yet reinforcing bonds that sustain him through public pressures. Through marriage and family life, you sense a delicate balance being struck between duty and affection. The household becomes a stage where patience, humor, and empathy are practiced daily, shaping the man who must later manage both a nation and the moral weight of history. You see how domestic routines, small joys, and quiet challenges quietly prepare him for the enormous trials awaiting on the national stage. Blending love with perseverance, reflection with gentle humor, and private warmth with public resolve, you now find yourself stepping onto the wider stage of national politics with Abraham Lincoln, feeling the tension in the air as debates about slavery and state rights ripple through town halls, newspapers, and quiet parlors alike. The streets are busier here, filled with the clatter of carriages, the smell of coal fires, and the chatter of citizens eager to witness and influence decisions that could shape the country. Lincoln stands calmly amid this bustle, notes in hand, preparing speeches that weave together principle, logic, and a hint of humor to ease the sharpness of controversial topics. His campaigns are both exhausting and exhilarating. You follow him as he travels long distances, sometimes by train, sometimes on horseback, shaking hands, listening to concerns, and occasionally pausing to reflect on the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. A little-known story reveals his fondness for storytelling during these campaigns. He would often recount humorous incidents from his past, like misadventures in frontier courts, to draw laughter and build rapport with audiences. Historians still argue whether these anecdotes were strategic charm or simple levity, but they certainly reveal a man keenly aware of the human side of politics. Lincoln's speeches now carry a sharper focus on moral issues, particularly the growing tension over slavery. You notice how carefully he chooses words, understanding that language can sway hearts as much as laws can sway behavior. You can feel the energy in the rooms he enters, the hush of citizens hanging on every phrase, and the ripple of applause when he lands a point that resonates. Yet, behind these public moments, he carries the quiet reflection of a man who has spent years observing human nature, knowing that every audience is composed of individuals with their own fears, hopes, and doubts. The political arena also tests his patience and resolve. You can sense the frustration when debates become heated, the subtle exasperation when colleagues fail to act with integrity, and the careful restraint he exercises to maintain dignity. Small, quirky habits persist. Lincoln is known to pace while thinking, scratch his chin thoughtfully, or scribble notes in margins during meetings. Behaviors that make him appear both human and approachable. These habits, though seemingly trivial, reveal a mind that processes complexity while maintaining a grounded, relatable presence. Evenings bring reflection. You follow him into quiet rooms where candlelight casts soft shadows on walls lined with papers, maps, and books. Here he rereads speeches, revises arguments, and contemplates the broader implications of his positions. You can almost hear the soft rustle of paper as he considers each word, the weight of history pressing gently yet insistently against his conscience. Historians still argue about some of his early political choices, whether they were compromises of principle or strategic moves toward greater influence. But you witness the care with which he approaches every decision, as you step back into the crisp night air. You sense the growing tension in the country and the heavy responsibility Lincoln bears as he rises to prominence. He is no longer just a frontier lawyer or a family man. He is a figure beginning to shape the national conversation, blending empathy, intellect, and a quiet humor to navigate complex and contentious issues. Each speech, each handshake, each carefully noted observation brings him closer to the monumental challenges he will soon face as a leader on the national stage, preparing for a time when the decisions he makes will echo across generations. You step through the doors of the White House with Abraham Lincoln, feeling the gravity of the space and the weight of the nation pressing gently against the walls. The air is a mixture of polished wood, lingering candle smoke, and faint drafts from tall, narrow windows. You notice the constant movement of aides, clerks, and soldiers, each carrying messages, reports, and petitions, while the steady tick of a clock seems to mark not only time but the relentless rhythm of responsibility. Here, Lincoln navigates a nation divided, balancing the personal demands of the presidency with the moral and political crises unfolding before him. The Civil War has begun, and you can sense the tension in every corridor and chamber. Lincoln walks carefully through his daily routines, reviewing battle reports, corresponding with generals, and shaping policies that will determine the survival of the Union. Oddly human habits emerge amidst the immense responsibility. He sketches figures and jokes quietly with staff, sometimes breaking the weight of the day with a laugh at an absurd anecdote from his travels. Historians still argue how much these small quirks revealed resilience versus coping mechanisms, but they hint at a man who remains deeply human despite extraordinary circumstances. He engages directly with the human cost of conflict, reading letters from grieving families and offering gentle words of comfort. You notice the quiet sorrow in his expression, tempered by the pragmatism needed to lead effectively. At the same time, he studies strategies with generals, sometimes disagreeing sharply yet always listening. Weighing the ethical implications of military action, the mixture of intellect, empathy, and strategic thinking becomes a defining feature of his presidency, a delicate balance between justice, practicality, and the preservation of life. You observe Lincoln giving speeches that are both stirring and measured. Citizens gather in town halls and across the country to hear his words, each carefully chosen to inspire unity without inciting unnecessary fear. A quirky story reveals that he sometimes practiced these speeches aloud in empty corridors, pacing and gesturing, imagining audiences of hundreds while alone, a private rehearsal that hints at his dedication to both rhetoric and persuasion. Historians still debate the exact influence of these habits on his public image, but they demonstrate a meticulous, thoughtful approach to leadership rarely visible from the outside. Evenings bring rare quiet. You see him alone in the dim light of his office, reading, writing, and reflecting on both the immediate demands of governance and the long-term vision for the nation. You can almost hear the rustle of papers as he reworks a proclamation, the soft scratch of pen on parchment marking decisions that will echo through history. These private moments reveal Lincoln's inner world, a blend of contemplation, humor, sorrow, and determination. Walking down the silent corridors at night, you feel the weight of the office upon him, yet also the human resilience that carries him through. Each decision, each meeting, each carefully delivered speech is a step along a path fraught with risk, responsibility, and moral complexity. Here in the White House, amidst war, uncertainty, and personal reflection, Lincoln embodies both the extraordinary demands of leadership and the persistent humanity that guides him through the darkest moments of a nation's history. You sit quietly with Abraham as he contemplates the weighty task of redefining freedom for millions, feeling the stillness of the room around him punctuated only by the soft scratching of quill on paper and the occasional flicker of lamplight. The Emancipation Proclamation is taking shape, a document that carries the promise of justice and the burden of controversy. You notice the careful precision in his words, the pauses as he rereads sentences, and the subtle gestures, tugging at his coat, leaning on the desk, as he considers both the moral and political ramifications of each phrase. Lincoln's approach is deliberate. You watch him balance compassion with strategy, knowing that each decision will ripple across battlefields, homes, and legislative halls. There are little-known stories of him consulting quietly with aides at odd hours, weighing alternatives, and even seeking the counsel of ordinary citizens who walk into his office with questions, worries, or advice. Historians still argue whether his motives were driven purely by moral conviction or calculated political necessity, but the care and thoughtfulness with which he frames the proclamation is unmistakable. You see him reflecting on letters from enslaved people, abolitionists and skeptics alike, their voices merging into a chorus that both inspires and challenges him. A small, quirky detail emerges. He sometimes hums quietly while thinking, a habit that seems almost incongruous with the seriousness of the work, yet humanizes the immense effort involved. His empathy is palpable, extending to both those who suffer oppression and those grappling with the enormity of change. His thought process is meticulous, blending legal reasoning with a deep understanding of human emotion, public sentiment, and historical consequence. Every line reflects lessons learned from frontier life, legal practice, and personal reflection. A convergence of his lifelong observations of human behavior. Even in quiet moments, you notice his mind remains active, considering the ripple effects of emancipation on politics, the economy, and the very fabric of society. He drafts letters, revises speeches, and engages in thoughtful conversations with trusted advisors, all while maintaining the humility and gentleness that have characterized him since his youth. You can almost feel the weight of history pressing on his shoulders, yet also the quiet resolve and inner light that allow him to act with courage and foresight. As night falls outside the window, you sense the solemnity and hope intertwined in Lincoln's work. He is both the observer and the architect of change, navigating moral complexity with careful reasoning and human empathy. The Emancipation Proclamation emerges not just as a document, but as a reflection of a man shaped by hardship, love, observation, and reflection. A man who seeks to extend justice while guiding a fractured nation toward a new vision of unity and freedom. You enter the final chapter of Abraham Lincoln's life, feeling both the solemnity and the quiet dignity that surrounds his last days. The air is heavy with anticipation and the faint scent of burning coal, while the sounds of the city outside carry both ordinary life and the distant echoes of unrest. You noticed him walking slowly through the corridors of the White House, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by aides, his tall frame bending slightly under the weight of responsibility and the fatigue that has accumulated over years of public service. Each step feels measured, a reflection of both physical weariness and the immense moral burden he carries. In these closing months, Lincoln remains deeply engaged with the nation's affairs. He studies reports, drafts, letters, and attends meetings with a combination of patience and urgency. Small quirks persist. He frequently hums old songs while reviewing documents, paces during long discussions, and occasionally pauses to jot down thoughts in margins. Little-known anecdotes tell of him quietly comforting children in the White House, or writing personal notes to friends and colleagues with warmth and humor, demonstrating that his humanity remains intact even amid national crisis. Historians still argue about the motivations behind some of his final policies, whether strategic or purely principled, but the care and thought he invests in each decision is undeniable. You sense the tension of the country reflected in the man himself. The Civil War has concluded, yet the wounds, both political and personal, remain raw. He walks among survivors, soldiers, and citizens, observing the subtle shifts in mood and morale, offering reassurance and wisdom where he can. The assassination threat lingers as an unspoken shadow, yet he continues to meet guests, deliver speeches, and pursue a vision of national healing. His humor, quiet and understated, occasionally surfaces in these tense moments, reminding those around him that even a great leader remains fundamentally human. As you witness his final evening, the room is calm, with lamplight casting gentle shadows across papers and furniture. You imagine him reflecting on the journey from log cabin to presidency, on lost loved ones, early hardships, triumphs, and failures. Even in these last hours, he carries an unwavering sense of purpose, a desire to see justice, unity, and hope flourish in the nation he has guided through its darkest hours. He pauses to write a short note, hums softly, and closes his eyes for a brief moment, a gesture both ordinary and profound. The moments following are serene yet heavy with history. His passing leaves a nation mourning, yet his legacy of empathy, resilience, humor, and moral courage lingers in small details, letters, speeches, anecdotes, and the quiet memories of those who knew him. You can feel the gentle echo of a life lived with purpose, tempered by reflection and human warmth. Every hardship, every lesson, every careful observation Uvaid followed throughout his life coalesces into a portrait of a man whose decisions reshaped history, yet whose essence remains quietly relatable, almost tangible in these intimate recollections. Now, as you settle into the soft rhythm of reflection, imagine the life of Abraham Lincoln stretching before you like a gentle river, flowing from the small log cabin in Kentucky through the dusty courts of the prairie, into the halls of power and finally into the quiet of his last days. You feel the cool evening air brushing against your face, carrying faint scents of wood smoke and fading flowers, as if the world itself is exhaling after a long tense journey. His life is a tapestry woven from humble beginnings, careful observation, quiet humor, and a persistent empathy that touched everyone around him. You sense the weight of his hardships, the early heartbreak, the trials of family and public service, yet also the moments of lightness. A playful story told to children, a quietly sketched caricature, the laughter shared with friends and colleagues. These small details linger, softening the edges of history, and reminding you that even towering figures are shaped by ordinary experiences and tender moments. You feel the persistence of his curiosity, his endless engagement, with learning and understanding echoing in the quiet corners of rooms, in the faint rustle of pages, and in the thoughtful pauses he takes when making decisions that affect millions. As your thoughts drift along the trajectory of his life, you notice the continuity of character. resilience, patience, and moral clarity that flows from one stage to the next, from log cabin to White House, from love to loss, from law to leadership. Lincoln's journey is less about dramatic events and more about the shaping of a man through observation, reflection, and careful action. You feel a gentle sense of closure, as if the threads of his story are settling into place, leaving a calm, enduring impression. Let your mind linger on the quiet moments, the candlelit readings, the soft laughter of children, the lone walks along prairie paths, the subtle yet profound gestures of empathy and care. These are the moments that define his humanity, that make history feel intimate, accessible, and deeply personal. Allow the soft imagery to settle into your senses, carrying with it the warmth, complexity, and gentle wisdom of a life fully lived. And now, as your attention drifts and the story gently fades, imagine the light of that long life lingering softly, a whisper of history and humanity fading into the calm of your own evening.